Hello, I'm Gina Cacceci, webinar host with CenterWatch. Welcome to today's webinar on 5 Telltale Signs You're Ready for an Electronic TMF System. This webinar is brought to you by Agatha. We're expecting the session to last about 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please feel free to prepare questions for our presenter. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the formal presentation. The questions will be addressed at the end. To ask a question, simply type your question in the area provided and press enter. Questions will not be viewable to other attendees. It is my pleasure now to introduce our speaker for today. Ken Lowney is the head of North American operations for Agatha, a strategic software solutions provider to the healthcare and life sciences industry. He has years of experience working with life sciences companies and understands the unique challenges these groups face. Mr. Lowney has worked with companies considering an eTMF application and recognizes the various drivers and concerns that come with the change, along with the features and functions of a modern eTMF system. My pleasure now to hand the floor over to Ken.
Thank you, Gina. I appreciate it very much. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to connect today. We're still virtual. Webinars are still a thing. I guess they'll always be a thing now. Love to meet some of you in person. Sometimes I'm reminded, and I'm showing my age here, of Romper Room. Do you remember Romper Room? Are any of you older enough to remember Romper Room? That was a television version of essentially a kindergarten class, and she looked through the camera and she said, "I can see you out there." The host remembers Romper Room. So I want to say I can see Alexa, and I can see Jerry, and I can see Sarah and Anita. I see you out there. Candace and Elizabeth, thank you guys all for joining. It's very, very nice to see you. And now you know that I am of an advanced state of decrepitude because I remember Romper Room. I'm really glad to chat with you today. My goal today is to talk about eTMF systems and keep it brisk, simple, fun, I hope. My name is Ken. I work for a software vendor. Today is not a pitch. It's not about buy this software. It's really about the customers we see being successful with electronic trial master file systems and some things that distinguish the successful from the less successful. As noted on this slide, I'm connecting from New Hampshire. I spent many years in the Boston area, kind of moved up to New Hampshire after the kids were in college, and now I'm on a small farm. The good news is I'm surrounded by lots of animals. The bad news is I sometimes have bandwidth issues, so if you hear me break up a little, be patient. If I disconnect, I'll reconnect very quickly, and Gina will cover things while I'm gone. Hopefully we'll be fine. The price I pay for life with chickens and pigs. So let's get started. I'm just going to go through 5 topics, as I said, with brevity. I want to talk about the basic ideas behind electronic trial master file systems. For some of you, that will be probably condescending, so I'll be brief. I want to talk about what's in an eTMF and what in a modern version should be the core capabilities that you must have. I want to talk about the core question of, is it time? What makes an organization ready? And then how to present it, sell it, budget for it internally, and talk about getting started on an initiative to bring in an electronic trial master file system. Let's start with the TMF basics. As I said, I felt obligated to put these in just to get us all on the same playing field. Many of you know what a TMF is better than I do because you deal with trial master files in your work every day. Many of you are probably CRAs and directors of quality and ClinOps managers. That's who I would expect to be in this group. So you know this, but the basic of idea of a TMF is super simple, as shown with the filing cabinet. It's a big collection of documents. It's the central filing cabinet for an entire clinical study. What's in the filing cabinet? Forms, files, documents, anything that's evidence of the execution of the trial. So that's a conceptual view of what a TMF is. Getting more specific, the International Council for Harmonization, ICH, says the trial master file contains those essential documents that permit the evaluation and conduct of a trial. It's a great way to think of a TMF is as evidence. 10 years later, someone has to look up and say, how was that trial done? This is the evidence. This is the file, system, and set that says here are all the steps, the documents, etc. Just like in a real trial, it's the evidence. So what are essential documents? It says those essential documents, that leaves something to the imagination. What are essential documents? They permit that evaluation. Every piece of evidence that would allow you to evaluate the conduct of the trial. So that can be lots of things, but they're supposed to demonstrate the steps taken, the protocol used, the compliance of the investigator, the qualifications of the principal investigators, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the evidence set. So if we go from that and we simply say, what about an electronic file master file, an eTMF? You know, I'm having a delay on this slide. I'm going to click again and see what happens. Coming back. So I don't see it rendering on my side. I hope it will catch up. Let me know if you see it, Gina. On my side, this next topic is what is an electronic version of a trial master file, and that's easy. It's an electronic, that is computer-based, version of the TMF. But it's a little too simplistic to say that because it's more than just the documents. And this is sort of a real critical point. An eTMF is a system, not a file cabinet. It's the system of how documents are collected, how documents are reviewed and approved. It's the system and processes by which they're signed off. So an eTMF really has to be thought of as two things. It's the stuff, contents, the documents, and I'm going to start using the word artifacts, the artifacts inside a TMF. But it's also the processes used to manage the trial that are evident in the TMF. And the best example, as I said, are review and approvals, electronic signatures, etc. So that's it for the basics. We're all caught up now. What I now want to share is a view of the evolution here. An electronic version of the trial master file has been around for more than 30 years now. It's remarkable. What's more remarkable is that I've been around for all 30 years. So I remember very clearly the first generation on the left. And in that first generation, what we had was a confluence of new regulatory requirements in the US, of course, that's 21 CFR Part 11 for managing electronic documents, and the emergence of a new technology called document management systems. Those systems were basically represented by Documentum, OpenText, and FileNet. So we had three big platforms that came into the market in the IT world and new regulatory requirements, and they met and sort of lived happily ever after, sometimes happily, actually. The key about this first generation in the 90s is to really understand what those systems were. Documentum et al. Were platforms. They are platforms. They are platforms on which applications are built. And in that first generation, that's what happened. The biggest companies, Pfizer, GSK, et cetera, purchased Documentum or OpenText, and they built trial master file solutions on top of them. It was on-premise technology installed in their data center. The software could cost millions, and the development cost millions. So that was the first generation. The second generation in the middle was the transition to SharePoint-based solutions. So we went from these specialized document management platforms to a ubiquitous platform in SharePoint. The thinking was everyone has SharePoint, let's do this on top of SharePoint. But again, there were applications deployed on top of SharePoint. Now, what that did was make it a little easier for IT because they didn't need to bring in a new technology like Documentum. They could do it on SharePoint, which many organizations already had in place. And then the third generation took that whole idea and said, let's do it in the cloud. Viva drove that innovation about 13, 14 years ago and said, we can have this platform for these kind of document management applications, but we can do it in the cloud on the internet. You don't need to deploy it internally. And what's remarkable across the three generations is that it did very little for users. Those three changes made it easier for IT. Went from custom apps to packaged apps. It went from on-premise to in the cloud, and it reduced the responsibilities and the complexities of the IT organization's job. But to be honest, it did very little for users and the business. And that's because those applications were still very expensive, quite hard to deploy, deployment times measured in months, once in a while a full year to get a thing like a TMF implemented inside an organization with complex validation, et cetera. So they were expensive, they took a long time, and they're kind of ugly from a usability perspective. So those are the first three generations. I talk a lot about the fourth generation. And the fourth generation, I'm trying to drive a change in language from platforms to applications. When I'm feeling irreverent, I say to 98% of life sciences organizations, I don't need a stinking platform. I don't want to build things. I don't want complexity. I don't want to spend months configuring it. I just want to do what everyone needs to do with my trial master file. So we've gotten to this core footprint of capabilities, and in that core footprint of capabilities, we want it to be simple to use, we want it to be pleasant for the users, we want it to be in the cloud, and we want it to cost much less. That's this new generation. So as you're thinking about eTMF systems, I want you to have that background and know what generation you're buying into. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. Now I'm going to move to my second topic, which is the question of, is it time for a TMF? So this is what I think of, hopefully you won't mind the analogy, but the questions, are you an alcoholic, or are you ready to get married, or any other set of quick questions to identify, yes, that's me, for self-identification. So I want to see if these 5 items, these telltale signs, might apply to you. And the very first one, and you'll hear a little hesitation here, I'm having to switch between 2 systems because my system isn't advancing the way yours is. Hold on one second, please. So I have to bring up another copy that you can't see and work between 2 systems. This will just be a moment. I should sing the Jeopardy song. Dee, 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 dee. Okay. Almost there. So Gina, I'm now on the slide, why is a TMF so important? And again, I'm not seeing that. Can you confirm? Yes, she has. So I know you're seeing that. Why is a TMF so important? The first thing is it's simply required. It's required by regulators in every country and region. You could say, but I'm not ready for it. I'm just doing my investigative drug application. I'm not ready for it. But as soon as you're in a clinical state, you shall keep a clinical trial master file. That's the EU regulation. They're very explicit. You should do that. And then you say, well, what's in it? And they point you to that ICH definition. So it's required. In the US, it's not required in quite so explicit a way, but it's completely implicit. And that it's subject to inspection. So the first answer of why it's important is you need to do it. It's required. There's another reason, which is that it helps immensely with your work. So one of the starting things with self-recognition here is, how are you doing it? Are you doing it with paper? Are you doing it with a hybrid model, or with a trial master file in an electronic form? I'm sure everyone here is either using hybrid or TMF. True paper, a stack of binders, is done down in the sites, but rarely at the sponsor or CRO level. The hybrid model is what's typical, is that we have those documents in a shared folder. We have them on a network drive. We keep them in Box. We have a spreadsheet where we track them. So that middle choice of hybrid is, I'll say, the most common. And I'd like to say that classic thing of, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not quite true, because it's not going to be compliant. Doing it that way, keeping it in a shared folder, presents lots of organizational challenge of finding things, keeping track of versions, but I can tell you it's just not going to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11 as well. You need a system that knows about electronic signatures, knows about audit trails, knows about version management. So those are the ways it's done today. Now let's talk about these 5 telltale signs. And the first one I want to talk about is basically just that you're using those kind of tools. If you're using tools like shared folders or Box or Dropbox or FTP for a customer I just was talking to, and email to move them around, much less fax, that's a great sign that you need a trial master file system that does that automatically for you, that does it electronically. So that's telltale sign number one, give yourself a point if that's you. The second choice, the second reason is that you're dealing with a headcount issue on this, that either you're thinking you need to add headcount, another CRA, another document management person, a document manager is sometimes called, or you're stressing the headcount you have to do this, that simply those manual processes, the emails, the collection, the storing, are taking a lot of staff time and causing stress on the organization in terms of both the staff you have or the staff you might have to hire. So if you're thinking about hiring to deal with this process, you should be thinking about investing in technology, because you could very well avoid the hiring. That would be a very normal thing. I never tell someone they're going to reduce headcount, but they may avoid headcount. So that's a really good indication. And if that's true on your mind, give yourself another point. The third, you wake up in the night and you're worried about the audit or inspection that might happen, that I hate this picture, it looks like me last night. At 3:41, our CRA has her hands over her face because, but what if? What if I get inspected? Am I really ready? How will I handle that? Oh my goodness, I'm responsible for this. And my clinical stage company is basically at risk because I don't have my TMF in the right state and we're not inspection ready. So there's a third point for you if that ever includes your perspective. The next is you're facing a ramp up in clinical trial activity. This could be you're approaching your first trial, or it could very well be you're moving into later phases you haven't done before. So you're approaching your first phase 3 trial, or multiples, that what was one trial is now going to be 3 or 4 trials as they spawn off of each other. Or perhaps you're insourcing from a CRO. That's a question on its own of why would I ever insource from a CRO? And I'd love to have that conversation with any of you. It's a really interesting topic. The point and counterpoints are, the point is, why would I insource? The CRO does this for me. I pay them. Thank you very much. And the counterpoint has to do with several things: cost, but in particular, control and quality. That blindly outsourcing this task, if you're a sponsor, certainly has risk. Blindly outsourcing anything that you're not fully cognizant about and understanding is always a risk. So there's lots of reasons to talk about that. But of course, CROs do this work every day, and it might be exactly the right strategy for you to be outsourcing management of the TMF to the CRO. Truly, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just we find many organizations go from an outsource model to an in-source model for TMF management specifically, not for everything to do with the trial, of course, but for TMF management. So that's the fourth point. And the fifth, and this applies to many, many organizations, that there are rumblings that you need to be ready for potential M&A or investment activity, that you as a small biotech, an early stage device company, a young pharma company, your fate is almost certainly to be acquired. That's what happens in our industry. Smaller companies get bigger, and as they get bigger, they get acquired. It's what happens. So you need to be aware of that, and you would know better than I do whether that applies to your company. But for the vast number of organizations I work with, that is a potential future scenario, that they will have to go through some type of change in structure. And when they do, there's going to be due diligence. And due diligence is going to be looking at things like a trial master file and making sure that the company is organized in a way to realize the value from its drug candidate. Having a great drug candidate is one thing. Having a great drug candidate that's been properly documented through trials is vastly important. So those are the 5 things I wanted to talk about. Give yourself score from 1 to 5. I'll choose 3. If you have 2.5 or 3, you might want to think about it, eTMF. Doesn't meant to be kind of a light way of looking at it, but I did want to share that those are the catalysts that we see the most often in working with our customers. The next thing I want to do is talk about basically what an eTMF does. And this is really important to me because, as I implied before, the differences in functionality between eTMF systems are actually very small. All of the systems, whether it's mine at Agatha or different companies, an older version of a product, a new competitor, what an eTMF has to do is incredibly consistent. If you're going to go to market and look for an eTMF, I would discourage you from writing 150 functional requirements before you do, because out of that 150, 135 of them are going to be the same. Every company's just going to say yes. So there's an easier way to do this. I always say it's like going to market for a word processor or a spreadsheet. You wouldn't write requirements. Everyone knows what a spreadsheet does. So writing requirements that says the system must be 21 CFR Part 11 compliant is a little silly because it's a waste of time. Every company is. Every offering here, if you say the functional requirement is I must collect an audit trail, every product in this category does. So there's a lot of consistency. Let me tell you what those minimums are. I listed 9 of them. The first is what I just referenced, compliance on the top left. It must be compliant with EU or US or EU, US and Canada regulatory requirements for managing electronic documents in a life sciences company. That means things like document versioning, audit trails, excuse me, and controlled access like check-in, check-out. I must take a little drink of water. Bear with me 1 second. The second item is that every system in this category should leverage what's called the TMF reference model. There is a publicly available trial master file reference model that made consistent the essential elements of a TMF. Now, this gets confusing because everyone's trial master file is different from the next person's. There are differences depending on what kind of product you're bringing to market. There are differences depending on the country, etc. So everyone's trial master file is different than everyone else's. But the reference model is meant to be just what it says, a reference, a starting point. And then you would remove things that are not relevant for you. And you would add things that are relevant for you. This is so important, I have an extra slide or 2 on it. So the reference model can be thought of as a standard tool. And this tool is a way to say everything regarding content, that is what are the artifacts, the naming, the structure, that is the folder structure, and the standard metadata, that is the identifiers of information, the fields in the documents and data are consistent for everyone. There's no law that says you have to use the reference model. There's only common sense that says, why wouldn't you use the reference model? The reference model is a common starting point, and most products handle it this way. We will start a study, we will load it with the reference model and allow you to make changes that say, okay, that's the reference model. Here's my master template for my study documents, for my TMF. So that's absolutely essential. Now let's talk about these other 7 items. Templates or forms, so that you have ready-to-use things like 1572s and e-consents and other forms should be a part of every system. You need to have role-based access control. That means access that based on a person's login, they're put into a certain role, and based on that role, manager or country manager or some subset of responsibility, they can only see what they're supposed to see. Another critical set of features are review and approval workflows, so that when a document is created, an artifact is created, it can be put through standard workflows for other people to review and sign off, and that's structured. Tasks are created, tasks are assigned with dates, etc. Version management to keep track of the draft, the interim versions, the final versions, and then new major versions of documents. That should be done automatically. Import and export is essential. The ability to pull in a set of TMF files that already exist, perhaps from another system, perhaps from a shared drive, that there are existing artifacts and they want to be pulled in. And then to export as well, to export as well, to go ahead and provide all the documents from the existing system, such as ours, and put them out into a standard format so they're transportable. So that's another capability. The what's missing capability, I see your question, Cheryl, we'll come back to it. The what's missing, so that a CRA can look and say, okay, out of the 150 artifacts, I see 120 are done. Tell me what's missing. What are the missing items? And then lastly, collaborative authoring. So collaborative authoring means the ability for multiple reviewers and editors to work on the same document, exchange comments, etc. To me, those are the critical eTMF features. When I said before, don't do a model with 100 and whatever I said, 85 or 200 requirements, this is about 75% of them. That's why you don't need them. You just need to check and make sure you have these available. Then you can focus on differentiators. I do have this idea that I mentioned before, and I want to come back to, and I'm going to ask Barb and Gina to confirm to me that things are advancing, because I'm not sure they are. Gina, you might have to advance for me. I want to be on slide 21. I'm not seeing it there. Thank you, Gina. What I want you to see here is this idea of a fourth generation. So if every system does what I said on the prior slide, it's critical to get to the fourth generation features that are differentiators. There's a few that overlap, like the reference model, et cetera. But I really want you to focus on a couple of things. If most systems do the same functionality, functions, then what's really different? And on slide 22, I'll show you. What we want to focus on is usability, ease of use specifically, and speed of implementation. These are the big differentiators. This is where you want to dig in with vendors and say, I want to speak to other customers. How long did it take them to get to production? How did validation go, etc. I want to try the system. I want to see its usability. This all ties back to my 4 generations of this technology. For 3 generations, the systems have all looked the same. They've looked like 1990s software with lists and complexity, and goes back to being designed for big companies with dedicated staff that are in these systems all day. But what about a smaller organization? What about a company with just 2 studies, just a couple of people using the system, and they don't use it all day long? That system has to be much easier to use. There's always a difference for a system that you live in and a system that you visit occasionally. When you live in a system, you almost enjoy the arcania that, oh, I know I can use control, right click, double space and do something because it's cool and you use it all the time. But if you're an occasional user of a system, you can't have that kind of user interface. It has to be more like modern consumer applications. That's why we use the term apps. So incredibly important to test the system and explore its usability. On slide 23, I'm talking about the landscape in the marketplace. So when I talk about the difference between systems, and notice I'm hiding the names of the companies, that would get me into all kinds of trouble with competitors, in my opinion. And to be honest, this is an internal slide. This is us looking at our competitors and saying there's really 3 tranches. On the right-hand side, you have the big traditional vendors, very large, very costly, and long time to get to market. In the middle, you have some mid-tier vendors emerged over the last 10 years who provide a lot of value in addition to the technology with helping you with what I'll call management consulting, mid-level prices and mid-level complexity. And on the left, you have this 4th generation of competitors, apps, simpler, easier to use, faster to implement. So think about that if you're going to market. Now I'm going to talk about my penultimate point, which is actually going through the process of, that all makes sense, Ken, but how do I get this done in my organization? Always a huge topic and question. How have other customers gone from, I want this, to I have support and I can actually move forward? I'm going to take you through a couple of things on that idea, just what I watch organizations do as they navigate from the concept to the reality of an eTMF. The first, on slide 25, is this cost-benefit analysis. This is worth doing. Now, the trick is to understand it's not just dollars. That never is as convincing as it should be. It's dollars and other things. The biggest things on the left is that these modern systems are subscription-based. So it's not one big dollar amount that you spend in year one and then just pay maintenance. That's not the way it's done in this generation of software. It's an annual subscription. Basically, we think of it as you're renting the software. And that makes it easier to manage the cost. It also allows you to maintain control risk of failure, frankly, because you can stop your subscription. So it's a lower entry fee. In year one, all you're going to have is your subscription cost, maybe some additional costs around services. Year two, just a subscription. Year three, just a subscription. So that's a 3-year cost model. On the right-hand side, on the benefit side, which hopefully you can see is heavier than the cost side, you have not only cost savings associated with staff and personnel, especially, as I said, cost avoidance, you have the cost of the risk. That's really important in speaking to upper management, that they understand, and there's lots of examples out there of things going poorly in this area. So it's a risk avoidance argument, and then it's an efficiency and cost argument. Let me move on to slide. I'm calling out the numbers just so you know, because my collaborators are making sure it advances. Slide 26. And on slide 26, I'm being a little bit repetitive, and I apologize, but I'm talking about the challenges that you want to talk about when you're selling internally. I would say that what I'll call the C-level people, chief financial officer, chief executive officer, sometimes minimize and simplify the management of the TMF, because conceptually it is just a file cabinet. How hard can it be? But here's the trick. You will have multiple contributors in multiple locations. So you have sponsor contributors, all different parts of the organization that may be contributing artifacts in ZMF. You may have vendors who you work with, CROs and vendors for other systems. You have actual investigators. Some people have their sites come into the TMF. So that immediately creates complexity. And it's complexity that's opposed by the need for control and compliance. So that's one reason. The TMF ends up being a centralized collection for a highly decentralized process. Things are happening in lots of locations, but the TMF has to live somewhere, preferably in the cloud, and it's a centralized location. So that creates complexity and challenges. Documents must be able to be proven to be authentic. So simply faxing, or I shouldn't say that, copying documents doesn't necessarily prove they're authentic. They need that audit trail or an e-signature to be have authenticity, provable, and inspection ready. And it does need to be inspection ready. That's an actual legal requirement. The TMF can't be something you compile in reaction to you're going to have an inspection. It's a compliance requirement that it be inspection ready. So all of this adds to variability. Nothing about the TMF is defined with exactitude. Specifically, on the next slide, you'll see we're dealing with different constituencies. We have different sponsors, have different things in their TMFs, different drugs, different sites, different protocols, different phases of studies, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, even post-market. Different geographies, different countries have different rules. So that's where the challenge comes in. Every TMF is different, and yet you need to have a consistent set of processes for managing it. This is all part of the argument about why a TMF is needed. Now, if I'm working with a customer and they're trying to, quote, sell the eTMF initiative, overwhelmingly, and you know this, of course, but tie it to the business risks and objectives. Tie it, and I know I'm being repetitive here, to the compliance risk. Tie it to the risk to M&A or additional rounds of funding and being ready for due diligence. Talk about especially the ability to accelerate clinical trial processes. Time is money. Time is huge money. And study startup efforts can really add substantial delay to clinical studies. With the TMF won't be the thing holding, with an eTMF, management of the TMF won't be the thing holding up the start of the study. You may still have a challenge getting the signups you need for patients, but it won't be the TMF holding it back. And do focus on avoiding additional hires, and reducing wasted staff time on the mundane activities of taking things off faxes, making copies, sending them back for wet signatures, putting them into box or a shared folder, not being able to find items, etc. All of it is relevant. The last thing I wanted to share with you is thinking about presenting a TMF initiative to upper management. I almost always am focused on current state, future state analysis. You know what your current state is. You can describe how you're doing it today. Then you can talk about your desired state. Where do we want to be? Sometimes this is called an as-is state versus the future state, current state, future state, all the same idea. So that's the first thing. Do that analysis so that there's a vision of what the desired state is, and acknowledge that it might be a few phases to get there. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Really important with the phasing idea that maybe you'll start with one study, one set of activities to prove this out. Second, create a core team and an extended team. Differentiate between the two. Who's the core team focused on the trial master file activity and are going to be the core users? And the extended team, sort of the stakeholder group, has to be kept aware. You know, a group of 4 people who are the core team, but 10 people, including C-level executives who might be an extended team and are getting updates periodically. Of course, you need to build a budget, and vendors like ours will help you with some of that effort. Of course, you need to create a proposal or a pitch, and that pitch might include some of these slides on TMF 101. What we find is that, again, there's not as much knowledge of trial master file nuances and details as you would think outside of the ClinOps team. And lastly, it's not the last bullet, but my last point is test. Do a test. Try it. Evaluate a system. So I just think it's unbelievably important to have access to an eTMF and go through a testing model, go through a trial, if you will, because that way you can really prove out the usability part. Of course, check with references, those kind of things kind of goes without saying. That's the core of what I wanted to cover today. I did have a couple of next steps, and then we'll take questions. As far as the next steps, it's just more education. And then, as I said, giving a system a try. So the next steps that I wanted to first list, and I should say this seems very self-serving. These are things that my team has written that are useful to this discussion. We have a white paper on everything to do with the 4th generation of trial master file systems or eTMF systems. We have an ebook version of that. These are available on our website at agathahealth.com, or just email me. It's ken.lowney@agathalife.com. Notice the difference, ken.lowney@agathalife or agathahealth.com. So those are available there just for your research. There's another set of blogs available as well, 3 different blogs that cover some of the same topics, some that I've just talked about, but others as well. And to be honest, if you did any research at all and just typed in eTMF basics, you'll find a plethora of available resources, including on the CenterWatch site. Today's webinar, as you know, is brought to you by WCG CenterWatch, and the CenterWatch site is chock-a-block full with resources for the ClinOps community on Trial Master File. These are the things I wanted to give you as a starting point, but perhaps most importantly, as I said, give a system a try. So some vendors do, some don't. For Agatha, we always offer a free 21-day trial. There are no obstacles to it. Sign up, get a login, go through a quick orientation, and do some mock work in the system. I won't say play with the system. I don't like that vernacular for some reason, but do some real work with it with some mock documents. See how it works to create new artifacts. See how it works to put them through review and approve. So definitely go ahead and sign up with somebody. Get your hands on some software and do some experimentation. This is virtually everything I wanted to cover today. As I mentioned up front, I am part of Agatha. Agatha is a vendor. We have, of course, a electronic trial master file system. We also have other systems. We have a remote monitoring system for use by sites and for clinical oversight. We have an SOP management system for standard operating procedures. We have an Agatha quality solution for managing clinical quality and oversight activities, including deviations, managing corrective actions, and preparing for audits. So we have a suite of applications. I'd love to talk more about you, not just on that, but about anything to do with your own journey with Trial Master File. What you're thinking about, what your experiences were, correct me where I'm wrong, and I'd love to talk about those things. What I'd like to do now is ask Gina to review what questions have come in, if there are any, and we'll chat about those, and we'll take another 5 to 10 minutes for that if there are such questions. Go ahead, Gina.
Well, thank you, Ken. So everybody, now is your opportunity to have your questions answered by Ken. Remember, this portion of the program is also being recorded. To ask a question, you may use the question and answer panel on your screen, type your question in the area, and press enter. We will get to as many questions as we can in the remaining time. So Ken, you had mentioned, you noted a question that came in during your presentation. Why don't we start with that? Can you drag and drop documents into the system?
So that question, and I do use first names, I hope you don't mind, Cheryl, is a great question because it goes right back to usability. And the answer is any reasonable system, any fourth generation version, is going to allow that you can literally drag from your local drive or from an external file sync and share system like Box into an application like Agatha's or any other eTMF. And it's just essential for usability. Now, what happens after you drag and drop is also important. Are you dragging and dropping and that's it, or are you dragging and dropping and starting a workflow for review and approval? Normally, it would be the latter, that we're dragging and dropping something in, and now it needs to go through review and approval. There are exceptions, though, and this might be what you mean, Cheryl. Some documents are a physical copy with a wet signature, and you have an electronic version of that. Maybe it was faxed to you. That's a final document. So can you drag and drop in a document and say, that's it, it's final, no review, no proof? Absolutely. So you can have those capabilities, and they're usually configurations. I'm slipping by talking about my system, and I don't mean to. I'm very knowledgeable about lots of systems out there, and I'll say any of the modern fourth generation systems should allow you to drag and drop. Any other questions, Gina?
Yes, we do have a few more that have come in, but let me encourage everybody to continue to submit questions if you have them. So here's the next question. You mentioned that one reason to implement an eTMF is if you are insourcing from a CRO. Why would I want to do that since the CRO includes it in their services?
I did touch on this, but I really am appreciative of the opportunity to revisit it, because I want to be clear, I'm not advocating a wholesale decision. You shouldn't let your CRO manage your trial master file. That's not my position at all. What I do know is there's a reality that as organizations grow from startup to clinical stage, et cetera, they often bring control of the trial master file back into the organization. And I've had discussions about why. And as I said, it seems to do with a combination of cost, that it's not cost effective to have the outsourced CRO do that actual management of the trial master file. There's also a control issue and a quality concern. There's also often a shared model, by the way. So there's lots of models out there, and I'd love to talk more about that one-on-one. Let's leave it as, all I know is that organizations do that. It is a catalyst for acquiring an eTMF, is that they're pulling the management of the TMF back from their CRO or outsourcer. It's not every trial, it's just sometimes. Go ahead, Gina.
Okay. Another kind of operational question, does the system allow emails to be stored along with the attachments?
So these kind of systems do allow that. There are two differences that you want to look for. One is that, yes, I can take an email. It's a file ultimately, and I can store that email along with other artifacts of the trial master file, whether you store it as a primary document or an attachment. So that's the first answer. But the second is, can I actually, and this may cause a pause in people's cognition for a minute, can I mail into the trial master file system? Think of the eTMF as that filing cabinet. Can I mail directly into it? Just like you mail to Ken Lowney, can I mail to study eTMF at XYZ company? And some systems do allow that. Again, they would go in as a draft because someone needs to then process that and attend to that queue of incoming emails. But it's a really nice function because it can make getting stuff into the eTMF even faster than drag and drop. It says, I'm just forwarding this into the eTMF, and then the CRA will put it in the right place. So that's the question to that one. Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. Next question. How do these eTMF systems work together? For example, with Word in the way of generating version control documents?
That's a great question. Thank you, Christian. The answer is twofold. The standard approach for the last 20 odd years has been that when I click on a document in the electronic trial master file system that is a Word document, it opens up Word. So let's call it the host application, the eTMF, calls Word, opens it up and says, render this document. That means, put it into Word. And then let people work on it in Word. And Word allows, modern Word, I'll say Word 365, part of Office 365, allows multiple people to edit, etc. And then when they say they're done, basically when Word closes, that document is sucked back into the eTMF. It's up-versioned and tracked. So that's the way it's been done. And my perspective is that's fine. It's a little clunky. Technology people would say kludgy. It's a little kludgy because it opens up Word and chunk a chunk. It opens the document chunk a chunk. You make your changes. You close Word, chunk a chunk. It goes back into the eTMF. So some systems, these modern fourth generation versions, have the ability to actually do the editing without opening Word at all, having a Word document in the eTMF, but allowing editing of that Word document directly in the application. That's a term of art we use, without having to leave. Don't open Word at all. You don't need Word. We're just going to edit the Word file. It's very similar to the way Google Documents work, if you think about it, that you can edit things without ever downloading them. The file stays in place up in the app. And that's really a much more elegant, better solution. So look at that as a differentiator. That's that one. Thank you, Gina.
All right. How does the management of the TMF relate to the content collected and managed by the clinical sites? Should sites have access to the eTMF to add content directly?
Holy moly. It's a big question, Gina. It's a whole nother session. We'll have to schedule the next one. So I'm gonna repeat it just because it's I'm gonna unpack it, I guess is the term people use. So I have a trial master file system. I use it. I'm a sponsor or a CRO. I have CRAs using it. Should I allow the sites to put things directly into the trial master file? After all, some of the site files, some of their binder documents want to end up in the TMF. So why not? Just give them access. The answer is that's a possibility. It is a use case that is done sometimes. It's not one that I'm a fan of. There's a better approach. Providing direct access to the TMF, even though you can do that with lots of controls and they can only do certain things, they can only add certain documents, presents a usability challenge to ask the site staff to learn how to do that. And again, lots of times these older systems are more complex. So you'll get a compliance issue. I don't mean regulatory compliance. I mean, your site users will avoid the task. So working directly in the eTMF, definitely possible, definitely done, can be done carefully and correctly and legally. But I don't think it's the ideal model. A better model is that systems like ours, some of our competitors, have what I think of as a companion product to the eTMF. It's a companion app in the cloud for the site to store binder documents. So picture this, there's two spaces in the cloud. They know each other, but they're not the same space. One is for the site to store its binder documents. The other is for the sponsor or CRO to store the eTMF documents. And sometimes things can be, with care and precision, moved between them. That this document at the site or in the site workspace can be moved to the eTMF workspace with a click that says, basically right-click on the document and say, send to the TMF. That's the ideal use case for that. As I said, it's a big discussion. What about source documents and patient records and lots of things? But the short answer is, I'm not a fan of direct access to the electronic trial master file by site users. Big topic, though. Go ahead, Gina.
All right. So this next one I think is kind of a challenge question.
Oh boy.
Doesn't it actually make sense to take a platform approach? Because then I can integrate my TMF with my CTMS system and other clinical operations systems.
So the answer is the question is spot on, as they say in Britain. And here's what I mean. I'm being quite nuanced in my choice of the term platform. I'll stick to my guns and say you don't want to think in platform because you don't want to build things. Do you want a suite of interconnectable apps in the ClinOps world so that CTMS system knows about eTMF system, even knows about EDC system, and even knows about your patient onboarding system? The answer is absolutely. These systems do coexist in an ecosystem. And there's ways to do that. There's vendors with multiple products like ours, and there's also, in these modern apps, ways to integrate that are very straightforward. The magic term is REST API. I know that doesn't mean too much to everyone here, but technically it's a RESTful application programming interface. And a REST API is, excuse my pronunciation, lingua franca. Is that right? The ubiquitous way that modern apps exchange information. So look for that. That's better than saying, nope, I must buy everything one vendor. They say they have a platform and everything works together. Because here's the inside story. When the vendor says they have one platform and everything works together, ask them how that can be when they just bought their CTMS application from another vendor last year. That's the reality, is that no vendor has all these solutions. They buy them, they mix and match them, and then they force them to be more integrated. So they're not always very elegantly integrated. But the key is this idea of platform equals complexity, equals expense, equals long time to onboard. You don't want a stinking platform. You want a suite of apps that can work together. And the stinking comes from my Long Island. Sorry for that. If you're a genteel person, I won't say stinking anymore. I'll just say stinking. Go ahead, Gina. Anything else?
Well, I just want to comment. I think that was a good stinking question because it's the kind of thing you need to anticipate if you're going to propose moving to an eTMF. So I think it was a great question.
It was, and you will get that internally. What about integration? Shouldn't we buy these all from the same vendor, et cetera? It's a very common differentiator claimed by vendors, but you should disabuse them of their prejudice that their platform's the right answer automatically just because they have more components. By the way, this is an age-old discussion in technology, best of breed versus suite of solutions. And it's been going on forever. Should I buy Word from one company, a word processor from one company, and a spreadsheet from another, or should I buy them both from Microsoft? Microsoft won that battle. So they won the suite answer there. And suites are the right answer. It's a common space or a middle space between a best of breed, everything's different, everything's perfect for its use, but doesn't work with anything else, and a platform which says everything has to be built on the same technology. There's a middle space, and that's modern integration. So thank you for drawing that out, Gina.
Okay, we have one more question, and that is, shouldn't I be investing in a quality management system before an eTMF system?
I have a tough time with this because on one hand, I want to just quickly say probably that I'll give you our most usual situation for our customers when they approach us. They approach us as, hey, I am an experienced ClinOps person. I'm now at this company, and they're not doing anything right. They don't have a CTMS, they don't have a TMF, they don't have quality systems. I don't even know where to begin. And in that case, I think the suite comes back because you should be looking for different components. Ultimately, the very first step for many organizations is I just need to get some standard operating procedures done. I need a solution for SOPs. I need a set of templates and a place to manage SOPs. Perfectly valid answer. On the other hand, if clinical activity is upon you, if trials are about to start being defined, new drug applications considered or investigative drug applications, you really need to move on eTMF first, because the alternative is collecting stuff for a while and then sorting it. Think of it just like you would in your house. It's nice before you acquire a lot of things to know where everything goes. Otherwise, you put it all in the garage, like I just did with moving out from a relative's house, put it all in my garage, and then I have to go through it all. It would be better to have my TMF ahead of time and say, I know where all this stuff goes. I know what I need and what I don't know. Instead, I emptied the house, put it all in my garage, and now I got to go through it. And that becomes a big task and a big barrier to moving forward. So my answer is kind of sort of quality first, but to me, it's all related and it's very situational. And I think of a TMF as part of your quality management system. So that's my answer there, Gina.
All right. Well, that was our last question. Do you have any closing comments or remarks?
Only that it was lovely to be able to do this. It's a fun topic and a great audience. Thank you all for connecting. Lots of great questions. And my biggest thing is, do avail yourself of our additional resources. Again, ken.lowney@agathalife.com. But especially, just call. Just email me, chat. We'll talk about it and say, you know, I can't buy anything, but I'm interested in the following. I love to do that. It makes me smarter and better at what I do. So as the professor would say, my office hours are whenever you're available. Drop by and we'll chat. Okay. Thank you, Gina.
Well, thank you very much. On behalf of CenterWatch and Agatha, I'd like to thank our participants for joining us today. Please be sure to fill out the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. Your feedback is very important to us. This now concludes today's presentation. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you join us again in the future.
Bye, everybody.